Welcome back to Cisco Knowledge Base. This is Zach from Content Security Team. Today we'll discuss a new functionality that added with the version Async OS version 8.5x and higher. It's called VRRP, Virtual Router Redundancy Protocol. The documentations are located here during the beta testing. Once the release is available for larger customer base or as a GA, all the release notes and user guide will be posted here on cisco.com, where all these documents are homed. So release notes and user guide will be posted for everyone to review and use it. So what exactly the VRRP protocol allows us to do? It's also known as a high availability management network protocol that increased availability for default gateway when servicing the host. So multiple web security appliance in this case will be pointing to same virtual IP. In case of a failure, another host can take over and continue serving clients. It uses the IP multicast address 224.0.0.18 as a link local scope to send advertisements. Some of the states are initialization, master, and backups. So host with the highest priority wins, but if we have a multiple host, in this case the web security appliance with the same priority, the faster becomes a master. Whoever responds, the faster. Preemptive option is if the higher priority machine comes back online, it can take over and be a master again. We can have up to 255 hosts in a failover group. All web security appliances in a fail group need to be in the same broadcast network. So pretty straightforward. These are some of the specifications for VRRP that are listed here. Not all of them. But if we're interested to look at all the detail, RFC 5798 provides great detail. So the config steps are pretty straightforward. We'll go from the GUI is the network, high availability. We add a failover group, and we can complete all the required information there. We'll go over one and take a look at all the details. From the command line, there's an option for failover config command, new. We're going to start configuring there for the entire configuration part there as well. System log that provides all the detail in this case for looking at all the information in real time. For troubleshooting, the command we can do failover config. It will tell you it's the master. In this case, in order to read it, the group ID is 91. My virtual IP address is last octet 142.142 for different machines. These are from one machine, and this one is from different machine, which is group ID is 91. So this one is a master, this one is a backup. If you look at the priorities, 255 is a higher, so that's why I chose to be a master. Furthermore, we can use failover config command from the CLI and choose the option for test failover group. Specify the group number. In this case is 91, and that gives you all the detail as to the communication between these two hosts. So possible troubleshooting scenario, multiple master in the failover group. So, or no failover taking place between the web security appliance. For the first one, if we have a misconfigured virtual switch in the virtual environment where the virtual WSAs are part of the group, vSwitch where both machines are residing on the same vSwitch. That's important. If I have a machine A, it's on a different vSwitch than machine B, then I will have mix and match results. So this is critical. And also, due to misconfiguration, parameters can be different too. What that mean by the obvious one is the group. So if machine 1 is sitting on group number 91, machine 2 is sitting on group number 92, that will not match, and they will be independent to each other. So group is important. What are the caveats? Failover interface. So failover interface are always bound to a physical interface. So it must be, and then when we do the configuration, we'll take a look at it. A failover interface needs to have an IP address of the same subnet as a physical interface. These are just the requirements and must be followed. And again, the third bullet, failover interface across WSA's web security appliance belonging to the same failover group. For the services, failover is only available for data, which is proxy services. Proxy will automatically bind a failover interface when created. If a separate routing table in effect, then data routing will be used. So recommendations is to use for explicit mode only. Compatibilities. All web security appliance failover group need to run 8.5x release or later. And this is the obvious one, since this feature was introduced or is introduced in 8.5. These are the system log example, and when we tail this log, it will show failover group. If we went down or back up, and these are the state as we talked about earlier. It goes from down to initialize to backup, from backup to master, master to up. So with that, let's look at the configuration. So VRRP configuration, in this case I have two machines that are participating, and we can have up to 255 hosts. So to keep things simple, machine 1, we go under network, high availability. It brings you to the same page that I was on. And I have a group configured. I called it failover group 91. That's my host name. That's the virtual IP address. That's the configured priority. And the status is a master. The second one, same group is participating. Virtual IP address is 142. It's the same as the previous one, the last octet. His priority is set to 150 hard-coded. And since the priority 200 is more than 150, so he's a master, comparing to second virtual appliance is 150, so he's a backup. So what's exactly under failover config? We'll take a look. So failover group, this is a range of up to 255, and you can description just for administration purpose. Host name, this is the process is critical. Virtual IP address and the mask is got to be matched on the same group. So if a group 91, another machine, virtual IP address need to match in order to participate. I can configure the interface. In this case, I have only one interface. Management is configured, so that's what it shows. I can hard code it as a master, and the priority will automatically set to 255, or I can do a backup and set the hard priority. In addition, I can have a password protection. So there can be a password looked at between two machines or in the group. These are the advertisement interval. By default are 3 seconds. There can be changes needed for slower network. So we'll uncheck that. So if we look at the first machine, group 91, description is the same, virtual IP address is the same, interface, and I hard-coded the priority. I could have done the master, make 255, hard-coded, made him choose to be master, and left the default here. The other option we talked about in our guide is for preempt. So failover handling. How do we want to handle once the failover occurs? Meaning, machine 1, which is a master, if it goes down, do we want this machine to take over back in operation as a master once it comes back? Yes or no? If yes, then we need to go under HA global setting and set this to preemptive. By default, out of the box, is set to non-preemptive. That will make it, once the machine comes back up, it will take over as the master role again. And these settings need to be matched on both machines. So this is the second one where we have a priority set to 150. And look at the preemptive setting here. Is also set to preemptive. So these configuration parameter must match. We'll cancel out of here. So the config is pretty straightforward. There's not much to it. Network, high availability, configure the group, host name, virtual IP address, priority, and you can force it one for backup or master, and preemptive, yes or no. We'll look at our documentation here. Once we do this, then this part is configuration part is completed. Conversely, we can use failover config command from the CLI. Take a look at it. And this will walk us through if we need to configure a new group, 92, failover group, yes and no. So it will walk through the exact same parameters that we saw in the GUI. That's the CLI command. I have it here as a failover config, new, group ID, enable, yes, and then host name, and everything else is pretty much the same from the CLI. So it depends how you prefer to configure. Then troubleshooting is the failover config. So let's take a look at from our end. So this is a machine 1. I'll bring the machine 2 as well. Make it things quick. So if you see one on the left, the config-wise, group ID is 91. That's my host name. Virtual IP address 172.18.254.142/24. Priority is 200, is hard-coded on this one. Intervals is 3 seconds. Conversely, here's 150, 3 seconds. That makes him master, and this is a backup. To test it, there's a command built in here. There's test, failover config. Once you do that, it will ask for, if I have a multiple group configured, then it'd be useful to list which one I want to test. Let's say 91. Let's do the same thing in here. 91. So here it shows, as we said before, it uses a multicast address 224.00.18 in order to communicate. By default is every 3 seconds. It talks about the priority of the master, and if we do fail one of them, you will see these logs will change and switch over. Very basic. There's not much. It's not complex at all. All right, so let's minimize these. Go over back to our notes. We looked at these: master, backup, failover config, 91. We saw these logs. Again, to make sure these are all sitting in the same virtual switch, if in the essence of we are testing this on virtual appliances. And these must be taken into account when we configuring the group, must be the same, bound to the physical interface, so on and so forth. These are the log from the system log, and in our example, system log is enabled by default. If we tail the system log, this will show the information on what we see on the dock. Pretty straightforward, there's nothing to it. So a system log will show any activity if it's happening or state is changing. We can also change that to a trace level to get more information if we want to. So that brings us to review. So at the top of the page, we discussed the new functionality being added with the AsyncOS version 8.5x and higher, virtual router redundancy protocol, and that allows administrator to create a little bit more redundancy in their environment to fail over in case of you have a multiple web security appliances. We went through some of the specifications, and there are more in RFCs if you need to look at details. These are the VRRP specifications, some of them. It uses a multicast address 224.0.0.18. Configuration steps are pretty straightforward, from network, high availability, or if you use the command line, use the failover config and new. This is some of the troubleshooting command, failover config. We can do also a test failover. You can also configure preemptive here, delete, edit from the menu. So the vSwitch must be the same in case of virtual appliance their machines are hanging off of. Some of the logs, as we saw, this is from the system log, and the other logs is from directly from the looking at the test failover group. With that concludes this topic. Thank you so much for joining. Have a great day, have a great afternoon and evening. Thank you so much. Bye-bye. And see you in another video Knowledge Spice. Bye-bye.